BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello and welcome to Soft Lad by me, Nick Grimshaw. In Edward, the first story, I take you back to the night when my cosy, carefree Oldham childhood changed forever. For a long time, I grew up carefree, content and secure. I lived in a gentle suburban setting on the outskirts of Oldham, on a horseshoe-shaped family-filled street. Mornings were a Truman Show chorus of kids and parents waving fond farewells. My parents, Eileen and Pete, off to work, and me to primary school. It was an easy ride. Mornings spent making paper mache, while afternoons saw non-competitive PE with little sandbags. I idled away the day high on ice gems, drawing a smiling sun in the corner of every picture. I was a happy kid, sporting a thick bowl haircut, freckles and jaggedy gappy teeth. I was fearless and loud with an unquenchable need for chatter. Summer sang to me. I loved it. Long days for playing out and most of all, no school. These summer mornings saw me rushing downstairs for a Pop-Tart before darting out coatless and unwashed. I'd be on a mission, knocking on the doors of my little gang of mates. Come rain or shine, we'd be racing our bikes down the steep hills and playing Kirby out front until the streetlights came on. It was the summer of 1991. Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince's summertime was in the air. A summer spent exclusively outside, only stepping indoors to down a glass of Robinson's fruit and barley cordial. That's better. Right, see ya. I'd bang the glass down on the side before rushing back out. I realise now that this summer was the last time I'd truly felt carefree. It was the summer when I was 7 years old that my joie de vivre came to an abrupt end. It all happened when I met Edward. Edward changed it all. My summer, my sleep, my life. The Edward I'm referring to is one you'll know and may probably even love. He's the 90s goth icon, Edward Scissorhands, a figment of Tim Burton's imagination and the cause of absolute horror in mine. Edward was introduced to me at the Rochdale Odeon by my cousin, our Lisa. Lisa was at least a decade older than me, and I loved spending time with her. She lived round the corner from us with her mum and dad, Auntie Pat and Uncle Dave. Pat was my dad's sister, all warm and northern like a good auntie should be, with a brew constantly in hand. They seemed quite modern to me as they had a coffee machine and a black kitchen worktop. But while Pat and Dave were a picture of wholesomeness, their daughter, my cousin Lisa, was teetering on the edge of the dark side. Think Wednesday from the Addams Family, but with an Oldham accent. She'd come downstairs with her hair like the Crow in a studded leather jacket. She blasted Iron Maiden as loud as it would go, and I'd jump up and down on her bed, screaming as she taught me the lyrics to Bring Your Daughter to the Slaughter. Lisa took this as a sign that, at age 7, I too was ready for the goth fest of Edward and his scissors. One Friday night she offered to babysit. Little did we know, but this would be a Friday night to change it all. A night that instilled the absolute fear in me, pretty much for a lifetime. A night that Lisa still feels terrible about. I remember the feel of the cinema and the thrill of being out with our Lisa as I gazed up in amazement at the big screen. Once the trailers were through, the movie began with a wholesome Once Upon a Time. A snowy scene appeared, and a little old lady is telling a bedtime story to her granddaughter. This is nice, I thought. It's set in a seemingly perfect suburban town and begins with us following the life of an Avon rep. She spots a gated mansion that looms over the town, presumably with the thought that people with mansions love skincare. I smile up at Lisa. It was then we meet the protagonist, Edward. Edward has scissors for hands. Wait, what? Scissors for hands? Is Tim Burton okay, hon? The previous 6 years of my life had been fairy tales and cute cartoons, with the only hard-hitting stuff coming from an edgy episode of Grange Hill. Now, I was privy to some maniac made by some mad inventor. The vision of him will forever be the scariest thing I've ever seen. In a burnt-out, battered attic, we see a figure hunched over in an outfit that the Pussycat Dolls would have loved, peering out with his soulless, beady black eyes. I grab Lisa's hand. He was terrifying. Rather than finish the job and give him some hands, the old man made Edward's hands out of giant gardening blades, hence the punchy nickname. Why did he do that? Why not spoons? No hands would be better. All he can do is cut. Rather than just leg it, the Avon lady adopts him. Odd decision. Hilarity ensues as Edward tries to fit into this suburban way of life. He starts to give edgy Tony and Guy-style haircuts to the women around town. He's a good egg with a sweet soul longing for acceptance, but I hated him. The deep, baggy purple bags under his eyes, the bewildered, lost look across his face. Ooh, the jet-black hair on end against the hallowed white skin covered in new, thick, blood-red scars. I remember standing up at the end and walking across the popcorn-strewn carpet in silence. It was the first time I'd experienced any other emotion than just loveliness. I looked up at our Lisa for reassurance. I loved that, did you? She asked. I was shell-shocked. Yeah, I said. But no, Lisa, I absolutely did not love it. I got home way past my regular bedtime, and for the first time in my 7 years of breathing, I was quiet. He must be tired, Eileen said, as I was commanded upstairs to bed. I looked up at the stairs and felt uneasy. Me, alone, upstairs, near the attic, like the one Edward lives in. I made it halfway before running back down to the lounge. Get up the bleeding stairs, my dad Pete said. Eileen walked me back up and I gripped her hand like a vice. Please, can I have a lamp on? I asked. I made her check my wardrobe. He wasn't in there. I made her check behind the curtains. He wasn't there either. Okay, Mum asked. Now get to sleep. She didn't have time for this. She was missing Bandergold. I lay there in dead silence. Every creak made me throw the duvet up in the air, high jumping out of the bed and fly downstairs into the living room. And one lamp wasn't cutting it. I needed another. Then the big light, then the landing light, until at night every single light would be on upstairs. It's like bleeding Blackpool illuminations up here, Pete'd say before flicking off the landing light to my banshee wailings. Oh, he's gonna get me. He is not gonna get you, because he's not bleeding real, my dad'd shout. Now get to sleep, will ya? Bleeding soft lad. I'd creep out of my bedroom and onto the landing. We had this big oblong window that gave a wide lens view over our suburban street. It looked like the movie. The bungalows, the hanging baskets, the driveways. And I'd have visions of Edward walking down the street, his PVC bodysuit wet in the Mancunian rain. It all cast an Edward-shaped shadow over my life. I dreaded bedtime. Sunsets gave me the shudder, a big, scary sign that it'd be dark soon. This went on for weeks, then months, then years. As I grew, my Edward fear mutated into being scared of everything and everyone. As something of a night owl then, it was a bloody nightmare. I'd happily host my evening radio show in the basement of the old Radio 1, then shit my pants, rush into my car before jumping in and locking the doors at breakneck speed. Some nights I'd work myself up so much that I'd have to drive over to stay at friends' houses. I was no longer 7 years old. I was 25, even 31. I only spoke to my therapist about this years later. Once we'd done trauma, mourning, gay guilt, regular guilt, and Catholic guilt, we got onto the easy breezy. Oh yeah, by the way, forgot to mention, I'm absolutely terrified of being alone. I told her how now, when I watch scary things, I'm dragged back to being that 7-year-old kid in my single bed. The scary stuff is too scary for me. Her solution was groundbreaking. Don't watch them then, she said. Oh yeah, hadn't thought of that. Genuinely. I gave her a 50 quid and left, revelling in her breakthrough professional suggestion. So now, I don't watch them. I'm on a strict diet of Attenborough before bed. It drives my fiancée Mish mad. Then, in 2013, I went to meet actual Edward Scissorhands, Mr. Johnny Depp, at his hotel. I was there to interview him about his new movie, The Lone Ranger, but I decided to tell him immediately why I was really there. I was shit scared of you as a kid. Then I couldn't shut up about it, reeling out every symptom. I look at the PR who is urging me to ask Johnny about the movie that he made this year. Fair. I ask him about his horse on set, but all I can do is stare in his beady Edward eyes and start to sweat. It was probably the worst interview of my life. Christmas 2021 came around and something magical happened. We were forcibly locked in the house with a festive COVID infection, and I was flicking through the channels on the telly. 4 p.m, Channel 4, Edward Scissorhands. The COVID was clearly messing with my brain because I decided I'd watch it alone. I settled with my obligatory December cheese and decided to finally face my fears. I started to feel hot and panicked, but then something happened. Was I actually scared of Edward Scissorhands, or did my childhood fear stem from being scared of the fact that I was actually into homosexual, BDSM, goth fetish looks? Because watching now, Edward Scissorhands is hot, like screaming on your sofa, howling at the moon, calling your friends to tell them, hot. I mean, he's a complex, artistic, sexy outsider who can give you a short back and sides from time to time. What's not to love? As the film plodded on, I got it. I finally saw what our Lisa saw, the softness of Edward. He was trying to show me it's okay to be an Edward, okay to be different. Was I Edward? Growing up, I'd spent a lot of time feeling like the odd one out, worrying how my suburban life would look with no wife and no kids. And while I wasn't walking around in a black all-in-one catsuit, I was a weirdo too. Edward couldn't conform, and I couldn't conform to the other boys at school with their Rockports and Helly Hansons. I wanted to wear my mum's white Burberry trench to school with buckled shoes from Russell and Bromley and a blue plastic ring. You look like you work in the freezers at Asda, they laughed. They had a point. I now realised not only that I was Edward, but that over my life I've craved Edwards, picking the outsiders, the oddballs, the interesting ones, the hot ones. I realised it's not a scary movie at all, but a tale of acceptance. Can we let the man live? I felt a connection to Edward. We both felt like outsiders, and we were both massive fans of Winona Ryder. When the film finished, I ran to tell Mish in the kitchen. Mish, I'm Edward Scissorhands. He's not bad. I mean, what even is good and what is bad? What is normal? Wow, I'm him. Mish looked like he wanted to leave me. But I smiled and headed upstairs as I exhaled out my Edward horror for the first time in 31 years. My one true, gut-wrenching horror had become my greatest teacher. That night, I lay in the dark in peace, and I wished myself and Edward a sound night's sleep. Us weirdos have got to look out for each other.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
This is episode 2 of Soft Lad by me, Nick Grimshaw. In Little Gay Me, I look back on a photo of David Beckham that really changed everything. I never thought I'd be happy gay. Now I worry I'm not gay enough. But growing up in the mid-90s, I learnt from somewhere that being gay was something dark and full of holy sin. It seemed like a terrible affliction. Little gay me couldn't see through the death sentence AIDS ads and the shame, and I didn't look up to any deeply iconic gays or see the queer community in all its fabulousness. I just felt the pressure of this secret building up on my closeted shoulders. I was taught the Catholic way of life, reciting prayers and promising to give our lives over to our Lord and Saviour, Jesus Christ. I went to 2 Roman Catholic church schools, one of which was the quite camply named Our Lady's Roman Catholic High, which conjures up images of cruel intentions and stained glass windows, but actually it was a post-war ugly 60s concrete monstrosity of a building with all the charm of a cardboard box. As you might be able to tell, I didn't exactly love it. Big school felt aggressive and exhausting. Exhausting because I was taking on this everlasting performance of trying to be what I thought a teenage lad should be. Exhausting because I spent my time at secondary school trying to keep the lid on the fact that I was slowly realising that I was a massive gay. But every now and then, the lid would blow off as I'd do a high kick impersonating Margarita Prakatan or pick the wrong crowd and ask them if they'd seen Mariah Carey on Top of the Pops. And while I loved lad-approved Oasis, I couldn't deny that I'm Every Woman, It's All in Me was an absolute banger to a rapturous onslaught of pointing and laughing at my expense. The gayness was starting to ooze out of me, and back then anything that wasn't rock-hard masculinity was gay, and that was a bad thing. Any sort of femininity was scowled at with a cutting soft lad, as if being a hard lad was the only proper, approved, viable way to live. I don't know if being called a soft lad was meant to change my mind and give me a heterosexualizing kick up the arse, but it actually did the opposite. I found solace in my softness. I was told I had girly legs and played football like a girl and spoke like a girl, so for a while I thought I should have been a girl. During bath times I'd check to see if I didn't actually have a vagina. Once out of the bath, there was nothing I found more exciting than making a glamorous updo from a towel curled up on my head. I'd pull up my face to give me cat eyes and clip on my mum Eileen's giant gold earrings from the 80s and lip sync to Gloria Estefan in the mirror. I started to notice that I was not following the standard gender norms for a boy my age. The things I loved, they hated. They thought The Little Mermaid was shit. Deeply offended, I wanted to watch it over and over. I imitated Ariel on the rocks by wrapping my legs together in swimming lessons. I'd beg to watch it at sleepovers at friends' houses, passionately pitching the merits of the film before the ultimate conversation ender from my friends. That's for girls. I'd suffer in silence and have to watch wrestling. I'm laughing now at how gay Little Gay Me really was then. The list of things that I loved ran like a dream night at the Mighty Hoopla. Tina Turner, Gloria Estefan, and Kylie. All these women I idolised were glamorous and expressive, and my image of men was emotionless footballers talking on Match of the Day. Although I was leaning into my softness, I wouldn't say I identified as being gay yet. Me? Gay? I have a Jerry Halliwell bookmark. If I was gay, would I have a Jerry Halliwell bookmark? Well, yes, dear, you would. I'd clip-clop off in my gold-buckled Russell and Bromley school shoes, shaking my bowl-cut fringe out of my eyes. Surely I couldn't be gay, I thought. That'd be mad. No one's gay in Oldham. Gays live in New York in the 80s. Being gay was painted as some otherworldly life which ran alongside normal life in a different lane. This normal life was presented to me on the telly, on Corrie, and through my front window as I stared out at other families. You had a job and a wife and 2 kids. At the weekend, you'd go to the football with your mate, then off to the pub where you'd sit with your legs wide open and have a pint. Then there was this gay life, the antithesis to normal life. Gays were sentenced to a life of raving on drugs in Canal Street, with no families, dancing away their sadness in T-shirts that were too small for them. I loved my family. Were they going to disown me and send me off for a sordid life of gay misery? Now, our family weren't a conservative family. We swore, we drank, we liked crude comedy, so we weren't the Waltons. With Manchester's Canal Street a few mere miles away, we lived in suburban Oldham. My footy-loving dad and brother both showed love for the gays growing up. Pete loved Elton John, George Michael and Boy George. Fantastic artist is that Boy George. And our Andrew praised the clubbing skills of the gays. So the key lads in my life offered some comfort, but the gays were still othered, still the not normals. There were even some real-life gays near us, Bob and Freddie. And my dad bonded with them over a shared love of gardening and golf. They were referred to by everyone as Gay Bob or Gay Freddie. I'd cycle past and tell new visitors, the gays live there, as if we were passing royalty. Then I'd say, they're nice though. The homophobic smog in the air had already infiltrated my own preteen body. They're nice though. At school, I started to feel sick to my core as the realisation that I might not fancy girls began to descend over me. It was a slow, painful realisation that started when I didn't really get page 3. I'd hear the noises of "fwaw" from the lads when they caught a glimpse of Kimberly, 19, from Kent's Jugs. And try as I might, I'd just think, Kimberly, I just really don't like your knickers. No offence, Kimberly. It was a classic case of, it's not you, it's me. Back then, on a Saturday morning, I'd join Eileen on her errands. Martin's for ham butties, then we'd swing by the fishmongers, Summerfield for bits before the newsagents to pay for the paperman and a pick and mix. This little corner shop was a wondrous place of inspiration for little gay me. It's there I'd see iconic images of the covers of The Face, ID and Vogue. It was a window into another world there in vivid Technicolor, and every now and then I'd substitute my sweets for a magazine. This one morning, I inexplicably chose a football magazine. Though I wasn't into football, everyone else was. I headed back to the car, flicking through the pages and pages of football terms I didn't understand, reading it with the same enthusiasm as you do homework. It didn't make sense. As I flicked through, I became more and more over it, until something caught my eye. It stopped me in my tracks and made me feel funny right in my stomach. It was sharp and precise, a feeling I hadn't felt before, like a physical convulsion vibrating all of my cells. After pages of boring pictures of referees and balls, this was the therapeutic healing that my eyeballs needed, and I couldn't look away, totally magnetised to this near-religious experience I was witnessing with my very own eyes. It was a black and white, close-up picture of David Beckham post-match in a bath, sweeping back his hair with his hands and looking deep into my now very homosexual soul. We pulled up at home and I walked into the house and sat down, magazine still in hand, still unable to look away. I was starting to go cross-eyed a la Magic Eye Pictures and stared at it so intently and for so long that a magic phrase started to appear. "You're a massive gay," it said. Time passed, the sun set and rose again, and here I was, still transfixed on this image. Taking my eyes from David's face for the first time in what felt like millennia, I popped into Eileen's room, where she was doing her makeup in the mirror. "Mum, would you look at this?" I asked. Isn't this a beautiful photograph? Still believing that I was genuinely excited by the composition of the image and not the bloody drop-dead gorgeous cheekbones of golden balls. That? Oh, yeah, it's a nice photograph, she replied, slightly startled. I love it. I can't stop looking at it, I said. Can I put it on my wall? She looked hesitant, not angry or disapproving, but it was at this point that my mum had to think about what this meant. Her 12-year-old son, who had never had any interest in football, now wants to pin up a footballer on the wall. However, it's not a photo of Pelé scoring at the World Cup or George Best lifting a trophy. It's soon-to-be gay icon David Beckham, naked in a foamy bath. Her response, in hindsight, was iconic. Go ask your dad. I went to find him in the garden. He was up a ladder with an electric tree clipper trimming a conifer. Classic dad business. Dad, can I put this up on my wall? Opening up the double-page spread of doe-eyed David. Yeah, but don't use bloody sellotape on your bleeding wallpaper. Did he approve? Did he even take it in? I didn't overthink it. I went inside and carefully but forcefully plucked the centre pages from the magazine, rolling up 4 balls of blue tack for each corner. I stuck him at the side of my bed so I could lie and look at him. I was overjoyed that David Beckham existed in the world and that I could fall in love with him in the safety of my own bedroom. It was an intoxicating, overwhelming teenage crush that made me red in the face. But the reality of realising I was gay was crushing. Why me? Ugh, for God's sake. Of course I'd be gay. Can't having asthma, glasses, and freckles be enough? I prayed each night to my crucifix, which was on the wall inches above David's face, asking to be made straight. I'd kneel at the side of my bed, my knees jutting into the wooden floors of my bedroom, and pray to the Lord our Father that he would rid me of this plight. Tears had formed in my eyes as I begged the highest being to fix his mistake. Plot spoiler, it didn't work. I took it that my sin was so vile that even God couldn't help. He could create a world in 6 days and handcraft billions of humans, but I was so gay there was nothing he could do about it. What a rinse. And how could I be good if I was gay? And if I was bad, there was only one place I could end up. Hell. Then, late one night, I saw a holy vision that made me believe. A woman, running across a hillside, fell to the ground as crucifixes lit up in flames. It was Madonna. Not Madonna, the mother of Jesus, the other Madonna, from New York's danceteria. In the depths of my now teenage self-disdain, I saw her frolicking with gays on her bed in the movie In Bed with Madonna. She hugged them. She loved them. So I loved her. The sweet highness of her voice was an elixir from the weight of the world around me. It made me feel lighter and cleaner. I decided to convert to the Church of Madonna Ciccone. Finally, a religious icon I could relate to. I swapped my nightly prayers for nightly affirmations as I danced around my room to express yourself and human nature, finding every word of these pop prayers life-affirming for little gay me.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Welcome to episode 3 of Soft Lad by me, Nick Grimshaw. In this story, We Love to Party, find out how I fell in love with parties. I blame the parents. I felt constantly out of place as a kid. At school, I was always very aware of myself, aware that I felt different and not comfortable in my own skin, my awkward growing limbs getting in the way all the time. And sometimes I felt like I didn't fit in at home either. There was a big age gap between me and my brother and sister, Jane and Andrew, 11 years and 13 years, respectively. "That is disgusting," Jane said to my mum on hearing the news that I was on the way. Thankfully, she grew to like me. The age gap meant that I kind of grew up like an only child. I was often out of the loop on things. My siblings would reminisce about the 70s and trips to Texas to see family, before a chorus of, "Oh, you won't remember, it was before you were born." This sounds like they just sat around excluding me, but quite the opposite. They showered love upon me, but I wasn't like them. They seemed to be annoyingly perfect, impossible to live up to. Jane and Andrew just seemed to get it. The looks, the humour, the charm, the brains. Andrew educated me on the importance of trainer brands, and Jane taught me, with success, the power of Mariah Carey's fantasy. She attempted to do the same with maths, with less successful results. Not only were they dead clever, they were popular too. Jane was gorgeous, always makeup-free with perfect skin and hair to her waist. I thought saying that she looked like Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman was the biggest compliment I could bestow on any living human. Still true, to be fair. Our Andrew was tall and skinny, with a sharp James Dean jawline. He's in his 50s now, and a whole array of my friends still declare their love for him on a regular basis. Not being funny, but your brother is well fit, you know. He's a real man. I was obsessed with both of them. They'd breeze in and out of the house in their leather jackets, Andrew's sharp and tailored like 90s Prada, Jane's oversized and a little more grungy. I loved their tenacity for the night time, seeing them leave on Friday at 7 p.m, only to return with sweat-soaked dungarees stinking of fags at 9 a.m. the next day. I just thought they were the coolest people on earth. And I, the uncoolest. While they were long and slender, I was round and short. While they aced school, I might as well have been sitting in my dunce cap facing the wall. And while they loved sport and were adored by the popular kids, I was playing my Tamagotchi solo and going to Simply Red gigs with my mum and her mates. It was the mid-90s and I was gagging to be part of something I could feel that was happening outside of suburbia. The telly was saying things like Cool Britannia, and I remember seeing the chaos of London nights out in the paper, my parents shaking their heads at these pissed-up celebrities being celebrated. "Bloody state of 'em," my dad Pete'd say. But I loved it. It was like a postcard from another planet, one I needed to go to. Today the kids idolise Pilates-loving Kendall Jenner, but my childhood icons were, well, basically hellraisers. I wanted nutters. I wanted Grace Jones and Keith Flint and Madonna. My frustrations at not being able to go out as a kid drove me mad. I thought it was boring round our way, all bungalows and beige. But even though I wasn't old enough to go out, all roads led to the weekend. Fridays were all about TFI Friday for me. I'd be allowed a chippy for tea, chip muffin with enough vinegar to make you cough, and I'd get to sit in the lounge solo and watch Chris Evans live and loose in a pub. I loved the mess, the lager sloshing on the floor as Shaun Ryder came on and waffled some madness before a band crowd surfed downstairs. I tuned into the radio to idolise the boozy days of Sarah Cox, out all night and hung over on air, while Eileen would tut in disgust at her ad hoc observations and ravey selections on the school run. It was exactly what I needed to hear. I remember gasping in amazement at seeing Zoe Ball swigging a bottle of whiskey on her wedding day in a cowboy hat. Legend, I thought. It was the perfect cocktail. Me, a queer kid in suburbia, daydreaming in a time of burgeoning party in Britain. I wanted to be one of those 24-hour party people. I couldn't wait. By 14, I was chomping at the bit of alcohol excess, and I would beg Eileen to pick me up Vice magazine on her way home from work. "Vice? Oh, I don't like the sound of that," she'd say. "Is it for kids?" Yeah, just get it," I'd say. Then I'd sit on my inflatable armchair in my room blasting out cigarettes and alcohol and deep dive into the glorious editorials on squat raves and club kids in their messy flats, before cutting out the weirdest pictures to adorn my walls with, a sort of to-do list of chaos. I buried my emo teenage feelings of self-loathing deep down inside and dealt with it by getting blackout drunk. After all, everyone else was doing it down there in that London, and they were having a whale of a time. Well, what could go wrong? Well, quite a lot, actually. A sense of partying was in the air. It wasn't just me. Geography had something to do with it. Manchester is a thirsty city, ingrained with an ethos of going out. And in the 90s, Manchester was still riding the wave of the Hacienda, a club famed for its grimy hedonism. And while other kids dreamt of meeting Take That, I dreamt of raving until dawn. Science had something to do with it too. It's genetic, you see. I come from good raving stock. We're quite a thirsty family, a skill we inherited from our mother. She's Courtney Love for those in her late 70s. She loves a party. And she can put away a fair share of G&Ts without any consequence apart from a mildly red face. Now, I didn't inherit this aspect of drinking. Putting alcohol in Eileen merely makes her more up for a conversation, setting the world to rights. Putting alcohol in me is similar to when you pour it on a Christmas pudding and light it. Boom! There she blows! I didn't really notice Eileen's knack for the fear-free boozing till after my dad died back in 2016. Once our grieving had settled a little, we entered a new relationship. We became a little boozy duo, a fun-time girlie and a GBF on the daytime cocktails. It's quite Sex and the City, actually. We took holidays together, went to Fashion Week, had Valentine's Day getting pissed at Nobu because we were both single. We were living like Bonnie and Clyde, on the run from being alone. I wanted to make sure that Eileen wasn't feeling alone when Dad died. So in the summer of 2018, when I left the Radio 1 Breakfast show, I invited Eileen to join me and my mates in Mallorca. She came and day drunk us under the table. Our initial welcome lunch was at 2 p.m. and we ended up getting in at 4 a.m. We raged through a beach lunch, boshing back bottles of rosé and then onto a bar for tequilas. The next day was possibly the worst hangover of my life. I was bedbound and dabbing my forehead with a cold flannel. Meanwhile, Eileen was right as rain. "It's my 3 kidneys," she said. How could I forget? My mother has 3 kidneys. Really, it's medically confirmed. I don't know if she was born with them or if she's evolved one whilst living. Our own 2 measly kidneys trying to process the Sauvignon Blanc decided it was easier to grow another to help. But it wasn't just the drink that got our family going. We just loved a party. I did, even as a 6-year-old. Not a kids' party. I loved a dinner party with the adults. Any cause for celebration meant a buffet and everyone would come round. While normal 12-year-olds were drinking White Lightning and smoking weed in the park, I was helping Mum prepare a prawn cocktail and a trifle for her friends who were coming round for girls' night. There were an all-female force of L-net set doos and angular bobs, dangly clip-on earrings and shoulder pads. I was obsessed. I'd beg to stay up late and ogle their fab outfits close up, smelling their floral perfumes and enjoying their hearty laughs. But big family parties were my Super Bowl. I loved the mess and noise created by 40 aunties and uncles. I'd squeeze through the crowd at replacement hip height, the smell of spilt Stella on the floor, and jump around from guest to guest collecting kisses from the aunties. Seeing Mum in a 2-inch wedge heel sent me over the edge. She's basically Bianca Jagger at Studio 54. There'd be flans and quiches, jellies and trifles, and my personal highlight, crisps in a bowl. So extravagant. And when Eileen set down a 4-way dip box selection, well, we were living like royalty. I'd be tasked with taking everyone's coats. I'd take them upstairs, launching them onto my bed without a care, scared to miss any of the action downstairs. Coming back down with my trumpet. Forcing my way through the oldies, I'd stand in the centre of the room. "Are you all listening?" I'd ask. After a few minutes of erratic tootlings on the trumpet, I'd await the applause and bow before suggesting some music to keep the vibe going. "Shall we have a disco?" I'd press play on Candy Staten on the CD player, and my dad would start shrugging his shoulders out at time whilst getting all the lyrics wrong, as Auntie Carmel would grab my hands and say, "Let's have a jive. Your mum used to be the best jiver in town." We'd all dance around in a little circle in the lounge, and I'd throw myself in the middle to break dance and attempt a cartwheel or two before being told, "Enough now, you're going to be sick after all that pie." Then I'd fall asleep to the sound of adults chatting and clattering glasses and plates as they cleaned up the kitchen. Still to this day, my optimum drifting off sound would be me in bed and someone's talking and cleaning up after a party. These were my formative social moments. They made me love people, love parties, and love a spectacle. Even if it was just some crisps in a bowl, I was hooked. I started to think, how could I make that feeling last forever? How could I have fun all the time? Once I was 16, I was free to go out, and boy, did I love it. Me and my mates Jenny and Kerry were a dynamic trio fueled by Stella and Stone Roses, strutting around the northern quarter together before blagging it into Sankey's, a club in an old soap factory. Off I went on a big old lifestyle booze cruise like a crazed Jane MacDonald all aboard the HMS Stella Artois. I sailed the seas of the northwest with steady tides and sunny days until one day I came over a little funny. By the time I arrived at uni in Liverpool, I had 3 years of the session under my belt. On one of my very first days, I was walking to the library and all of a sudden I felt frozen in fear. An overwhelming sense of confusion descended over me. It was like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. I wanted to call my mum. "Mum, I feel funny," I said, voice all shaky. "Like what, love?" she said. "I can't explain it. It's like when you're in school and someone interrupts the class and goes, 'Can Nick Grimshaw go to the headmaster's office, please?' I said. You probably got a little bit of anxiety," she said. "Have you been taking care of yourself?" "No." "Why? Was I supposed to?"
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Welcome to episode 4 of Soft Lad by me, Nick Grimshaw. In that London, I moved to the bright lights of London in 2006 and felt guilt at deserting the north. I always had a fascination with that London. Never called just London, the added that was a telling dislike of the city by the north. It was sniffed at by my friends and family as a whimsical, soft place full of fairies, so obviously I was sold. Before making the move to live in our beloved capital, I'd only been twice. The first time I came home with a carrot fish. I'd been down to St Albans to visit Eileen and Pete's old pals, the wonderfully named Hugh and Sylvia. We went for a Chinese, which was like going to the moon for me. I screamed at the chopsticks, "Mom, look at these." In the centre of the table was a bright orange statue of a goldfish shooting out of the water. "They carve animals out of carrot here," Sylvia told me. My head blew up. What the hell happens down here in London? Up north we're having frozen crispy pancakes, and down here there's carrot art on the table. At the end of the meal, I was allowed to take the fish home. The next day, I took it into school, carrying this fishy carrot through the playground like one of the 3 wise men with frankincense to show the baby Jesus. The class oohed and ahed as I told them of the magical faraway land of London. As a kid, I loved going into Manchester with Eileen and Pete. I loved the thrill and the intimidation of the big city filled with shifty people who had a pace about them. We'd park on the outskirts of the northern quarter or by Strangeways prison and walk into the centre, past the derelict warehouses, looking like New York in a film. It was there that my parents had met, where they danced the night away in the 60s. They were proper townies, Pete from Collyhurst, where he was born into prefabricated housing, and Eileen, the posher of the two, growing up in Moss Side. It was Moss Side where I was born in the hot summer of 1984, a few years after the riots. On the way home, we'd go and see Gran Beatty, who was the most northern a Nan could be. So when I broke the news that I was to move down to London, it carried a Shakespearean level of guilt. It was not only betraying your family and friends, but a betrayal of the North. London? Gran Beatty took the news like a bullet to the chest. Are you sure? Pavements are very hard down there. What? We all asked. On your feet, she shouted back. I went down for the day once and our shoes, they were worn out. She shook her head in disgust. All of us Grimmies looked confused as we tried to figure out what she meant. But she was off again. Where will you get your hair cut? She asked. Will they be somewhere? Of course they have hairdressers, Gran, I exclaimed. And they did. My first of which was a £6 one at Mr. Topper's on Camden High Street and an absolutely absurd indie haircut. Think Gareth from The Office. Maybe Beatty had a point. They don't have gravy down there, you know, on the chips. And those were Gran Beatty's concerns. Shoes, hair, gravy, in that order. Once I moved down south, I had no idea what Gran Beatty was on about with the worn-out shoes, but the gravy one rang true. It may only be 2 hours away on the train, but it was a world away in terms of culinary delights. I went home one weekend and offered to do my mum's shopping list at the big Tesco. I thought I'd mix it up with a few London discoveries. I popped in some hummus, sweet potato and soya milk. The reaction was like I'd started smoking crack. What the bleeding hell is all this? Pete screamed, lifting up items in genuine shock. Hummus! I knocked him up a meal I'd learnt from the Londoners. Roasted sweet potato, hummus on the side, and lentil salad. Eileen wiggled her fingers over the plate, not knowing where to begin. I bet it's good on my Weight Watchers plan this. Are these carrots cooked? Pete said, looking like he was eating actual cat shit. It's a sweet potato, Dad. He carried on huffing and puffing like a kid who's been forced to eat their greens, and from then on, I was the bane of their existence when it came to eating. He's mad, he's lost it, Pete would shout in the background on the phone when Eileen would call to check what I'd be having for dinner, throwing her hands up to her temple in disbelief because I wanted to eat the odd salad. I should explain how I got to be this London wanker in the first place. I knew I wanted to be on the radio, but Radio 1 wasn't just going to come knocking on my front door in Oldham. By some miracle, I got an interview at MTV. What are you going to wear for it? Our Jane said, asking all the important questions. What the bleeding hell is MTV? Said my dad. The United Channel, he continued with a glimmer of hope in his eyes. No, it's a music channel, I explained. Bleeding hell, that's not a proper job, he complained as he flicked his newspaper back open. The thing was, after growing up in a household with a measly 4 channels, even I was vague about what MTV was. But in my mind at that time, MTV just felt like where I should be, faffing around in London and watching Missy Elliott videos. They had about 8 different internships available on their website. Suitable for none, I decided to apply for all 8. An interest came back from their international creative department. Great. Wait, what the hell is that? Rather than figure it out, I prioritised and went back to our Jane's pressing question. What was I going to wear? We headed to Urban Outfitters, which back in 2006 seemed very London. I opted for the jean fit at the time, black spray-on skinny ones, a white shirt, black skinny tie, and a black V-neck jumper. Think Franz Ferdinand's first day at school. And off I went on the train to London town, where like any professional starting their media career, I headed to the Lock Tavern, which I'd read about in the NME, for a pre-interview pint. It must have been a magical pint because I got the job. It turned out the job was nuts. I'd be tasked with searching through old MTV footage for shots of a particular pop star's look before building a mini stage for an advert we'd be making from cardboard. Then I had to make my hand into a mini rock star for the mini stage by painting on little leather jacket and a hand-sized guitar. Grueling stuff. There were all sorts of people at MTV and all sorts of accents, except northern ones. I remember thinking, should I start saying grass instead of grass and bath instead of bath? I felt like the odd one out again. I felt poor and thick. But then, one day, walking to work, I was approached with an "Oi!" It wasn't the posh southern voices I'd heard in the office. I looked back and I saw this tiny beehived mentalist dropping into a light jog to catch up with me. It was a pre-rehab and back-to-black Amy Winehouse. I'd not met her before, but I'd once queued behind her in prep. "All right, stalker. I always see you. What you doing up early? You're northern, innit? I love a northerner," she said in her Reebok Classics and Fred Perry shirt. She dropped me off at work like a very aggressive nanny. And later that day, I saw her in the pub and we decided to get drunk. She was a Londoner that even my northerners back home would like. She was real London in a person. Brash, smart, sexy, semi-scary and intoxicating. I remember thinking I wanted to have her bravado, waltzing through the pub with the swagger of a Polly Pocket-sized Liam Gallagher. But her hardness fit my softness, and we bumbled our way around, day drinking for a summer or two. As soon as the clock struck 6 at MTV, it was every person for themselves as we sped walked the short journey to the Hawley Arms, taking in that first pint, gasping as if we'd been down the mine for 14 hours. "Tough day at the office," Dougie the barman would say. "Yeah, man, I had to paint my hand green." Before long, it'd be heaving, and by 9 p.m, you'd have a party on your hands. It was the glory days of Camden, and this little-known pub became a youth centre for alcoholic adults. I first went on a Friday in April 2006, and then proceeded to go every single night for about the next 5 years. London was absolutely mental to me. It was an endless carousel of parties and people. Our MTV credentials meant we got invited to the launch of any dubious new product that we'd happily go along to. A new disgusting flavour of cider. Ooh, wouldn't miss it for the world. I figured out where we'd get free drinks, and like an indie sleaze Oliver Twist, I was insatiable. "Please, sir, can I have some more?" "More? More? Why, yes, it's 2006 and you have no responsibilities." We'd bumble from party to party collecting fellow thirsty revellers. Before long, a troop of us would amass, like a giant tumbleweed of liggers, and off we'd go until 4 a.m. I'd keep a toothbrush and change of clothes in my desk drawer at work. It was the summer of 2006, and there was a freedom in the air that I'd never felt before, and have definitely not since. We were the last social media free party generation, and free to not look perfect, and even more free to look like total shit. But after 9 months of being a terrible intern, my contract was up. It was around this time that stuff started to change. It seemed like everyone around me got their break. Amy became famous, Aggie became a supermodel, Caroline Flack and I started doing TV. It felt like a time for yeses and can-dos, but I also needed to get on with my dream, Radio 1. And I knew where the offices were. One year, when I was about 13, Pete invited me to watch United away at Charlton Athletic. I excitedly signed up for it and found the map of London my dad had kept from about 1968. "The hotel we're staying at is right by Radio 1, I said. "Oh," he replied with zero excitement. A man of his age thought Chris Evans and Sarah Cox played bloody garbage and needed to get something decent on like the Beatles. But I was desperate to see Radio 1, so on the day before the match he took me down there and I peered into an empty Saturday afternoon office. "Wow," I said as I pressed my face up against the filthy window and for a brief moment looked directly into my future. I wanted to say, "It looks like someone's ransacked the staff room at school," but wary of not wanting to have wasted my dad's time, I said, It's amazing. Then I looked back at my dad and I said, I'm going to work here. I remember the feeling. It was a feeling of intent, of honesty. It felt momentarily like time just stopped. Pete cracked his warm smile, cheekily shrugging his shoulders with approval. He repeated that moment to me before he died. He told me the story sweetly and lovingly and reminded me of how I looked that day and what I had promised us both. He recited my words. I'm going to work there, you said to me, before rounding it off with, and you did it. His full stop feeling more final than any full stop ever. You did it. It was the validation I didn't know I'd been searching for. It completed me somehow. As I drove back to London after he died in Manchester, I knew there was a part of him that created my dream here that would always stay with me here, in that London.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
This is episode 5 of Soft Lad by me, Nick Grimshaw. In Pies Over Pop Stars, the importance of choosing family time over famous time. My mum and dad are lol. Or should I say, my mum is lol and my dad was lol. He died back in 2016, just before Christmas, and it knocked me and the rest of the family sideways. We loved him, of course, like a family is obliged to, but we also actually really loved him. He was easily impersonated, and our impressions of him spanned generations, with his takes on sport and pop culture living on within our family like iconic, ye olde and hilarious scripture. He did all the right dad stuff, provided for us, cared for us, supported us. We loved him for thousands of reasons. But the top of those reasons was the most important. He made us laugh, properly laugh. Now, if you'd heard my radio show, you'd have heard Pete, either on air himself being pranked by me, or when I'd slip into my Pete shtick for a tale about our latest family dinner. I loved to slide into what I thought the Pete character was. Seemingly your average mank man, he was actually, on closer inspection, quite the avant-garde complex character. He was born on the breadline to a single mother and lived in prefab housing. When I'd be complaining about the hotel pancake selection on holiday, he'd quickly remind me of how he'd survived on lard butties. By 14, he'd finished school and was working. He was bringing home a wage. Whereas when I was 14, I was huffing and puffing around the house because he wouldn't get me tickets to Destiny's Child. He had to work hard and did so consistently for decades. As he grew up, so did his paycheck. He worked with iconic 80s and 90s food brands, and I think it all felt quite chic, quite Max and Susanna from Brookside. Pete got a company car and a mobile phone. The lard butties were gone. In came leather brogues and sharp suits. Essentially, he'd changed. Apart from, he hadn't really. And this is why I loved Pete. He loved nothing more than fried egg and chips. Back in 2006, when I started to be sucked into the world of celebrity nonsense, it was hilarious to see those two worlds meet. The worlds of Pete and the Paps. His nonchalance towards friends, celebrity or not, was the anchor that I needed. You only need one good friend, he'd tell me when I'd introduce him to the 67th person we'd met that day on our tour of Camden. My initial years in London were a constant merry-go-round of parties, and I actively encouraged Pete and Eileen to come down south on their pensioner train passes and slot into whatever I was up to that week. That might be a DJ set or a couple of chats with a pop star. Busy, but hardly work. They weren't getting the violins out for me, put it that way. Eileen would be clued up via reliable mum channels like Lorraine on the big hitters in showbiz, but my dad was hardly Perez Hilton. Pete had a killer catchphrase. Who the bleeding hell is... insert celebrity name here. The one name he was adamant to see on his jaunts to London was Joseph Sheeky. Not an actor or pop star, but a fishmonger who in 1890 was given land in Covent Garden to sell fish. Our Joseph is no longer with us, but he left behind quite the legacy in his restaurant, J. Sheeky. It was an unwritten rule that we went with Pete. After a day of rushing round to press junkets, we ordered the fish pie as usual. Eileen is doing her silent eye raises that say, "Oh, it's lovely in here, get us." When, OMG, Fran has just sent me the maddest text, I scream. Fran is Fran Cutler, a legendary Londoner who plans parties for a living. She's this tiny but bombastic cockney with a cheeky face and a dirty mouth. She swears more than an angry sailor. My mum and dad loved Fran because she cut through the bullshit of London, and to a northerner it was warmly reassuring. Her text this night was classic Fran. Direct, absurd and fun. It read, Madonna is having a party tonight. Madonna? Party? Tonight? My dad taking it in like he's receiving Morse code. Yes, Madonna, party, we have to go. Come on, I say, trying to rally the troops. Oh, Nick, I'm dressed like I'm going to Sainsbury's, Eileen protests. We're having a pie, we're not rushing off, Pete cried. You look great, Mum, and Dad, we can go after our pies, I say. The pies arrive and we discuss the merits of going and not going. Pro, Madonna is there. Con, Eileen is conscious she's in a Georgia Asda coat. Pro, no one will notice. Con, I have the breakfast show to do in about 8 hours. Pro, maybe Madonna will provide endless lols for the show. They can't decide and ah it over. I tried to make analogies to show the significance of Madonna to me by speaking Pete's language, football. This is like you meeting Rooney. Rooney is a bleeding kid. Well, not Rooney then. Pele. Pele? Madonna's not bleeding Pele. Cantona? He shakes his head and I'm out of footballers. They sense my impatience and deep want and Madonna need and agree we can go, after the pie, of course. I passively-aggressively wolf mine down the molten prawns, taking a layer off my tongue, and we wrap up the seemingly excruciatingly long meal. We arrive at the party an hour or so later than the designated time. It's a shit show outside. Crowds have formed of frenzied Madonna fans and movie premiere levels of paparazzi. I usher in the Oldham OAPs still digesting their tea into what was beginning to feel like the invite of the year. In all my years of partying and DJing, I'd never seen Madonna in the flesh, and my sense of gay panic was now sky high. We go in and I'm expecting Studio 54. And it was like Studio 54. But Studio 54 now, derelict. There was not a soul in there. The place was cold with aircon, and as the disco lights spun round, you could hear their motors churning, and it had all the fabulousness of a school disco. I rushed my pie for this, Pete said, with a told-you-so smile. I cursed the timekeeping of London liggers. Where is everyone? Fran told us, Kim and Kanye are here. They're coming in now. Who? Said my dad. Kim and Kanye. Fran screamed at us and shoved us at the nearest table. Kim and Kanye? Who's that? I've never heard of her. Pete shrugged. No, they're two people, Dad. Kim is... I tried to explain, but too late. They were here. Then there was this incredible moment. Kim Kardashian and Kanye West, two of the most famous people on the planet, descended into what they thought would be, just like I did, the social event of the year. Kim steps her manicured Louboutin-clad foot into the club and sees not Madonna, but Eileen and Pete. Hiya, love. Two OAPs from Oldham sat in an empty room. Kim and Kanye look confused. They turn on their heels and head back up the stairs. Over the course of the night, the room fills up and the place is soon packed. and it turns out that wasted celebrities love nothing more than talking to some random oldies. I found Eileen in deep conversation with Mark Ronson, and Pete, like a big masculine bloodhound, sniffed out the only other person willing to talk about football at a Madonna party, Noel Gallagher. Then, the big moment, Madonna arrived. And rather than us becoming best friends, she kept herself to herself in the corner, surrounded by a gaggle of muscle gays. We leave, and they comment the party was fine, but not worth rushing that pie for. We make a family pact. It's pies over pop stars from now on. A few years later, and work began to ramp up, and I'd had less and less time up north. But one weekend, I went home with my friend Amy. Pete and Eileen loved Amy, because she, like Fran, cut the shit. Pete loved nothing more than a sassy New Yorker with no-nonsense chat, and Amy had that by the bucket load. On the train up, we encountered a baying mob of middle-aged musical hooligans. They were swigging their G&Ts and singing Adele songs, and we told Eileen and Pete of our rowdy travel mates. "Oh, Adele, she's playing the arena in town tonight," Eileen said. I suggest that we can go, and it was like they'd won the People's Postcode Lottery, jumping out of their slippers to get ready. There was a very short list of who Pete liked in the modern musical world, and luckily Adele was on it. It was March 2016, and Pete was suffering with post-chemo pains and needed to wee a lot, so he'd be lightly jogging to the bogs every few minutes. We make it through Hello and Chasing Pavements, and then Adele starts to talk about a friend of hers. She said her friend is in the audience tonight. "Oh, is this me?" Amy and I start joking. "Lol if it's me." She said she used to be really tight with this friend, but they'd lost touch somehow. "Hey, that happened to me." She said that her and her friend used to bumble around London trying to make it. I did do that with her. Maybe she does actually mean me. Her discretion was over. "I'm talking about Nick Grimshaw from Radio 1. Where are you, babe?" "Okay, it's me." The lights come on and 20,000 people stare at me as I wave nerdishly back at Adele. "Oh, I miss you, babe. Let's have a curry and a catch-up. I'd love that." I do a thumbs up and nod in a pantomime style so she can read my yes from the stage. "Anyway, this one's for you," she says. The opening piano chords of Make You Feel My Love begin. I look down the road to my left and I see Eileen's giant green eyes glistening with tears. She has an empty seat next to her and has never looked so alone. "Where's Dad?" I asked. "He's gone for a wee," she says. I turn back and as Adele begins to sing, tears stream down my face at the thought of Eileen alone, of her spending the rest of her time with an empty seat beside her. A song I've numbed myself to by playing it thousands of times on the radio all of a sudden hits home hard like never before. The sweet duality of Adele's declaration of love and the poignancy of my dad missing it. His cancer was incurable. For a while I'd been maybe thinking it was going to be okay, but here was the first time I realised that actually it wouldn't be. As Adele wraps up the song, we're a mess. Pete returns down the stairs. "What the bleeding hell is wrong with you lot?" as he looks down and sees me, my mum and Amy soaking wet in tears. Then our sad tears become happy ones as we burst into hysterics, trying to process the craziness of what's just happened. Adele, a girl I once knew, is now the most famous person in the world and has dedicated a song to me. My dad's missed it because he's suffering from incurable cancer. The song is one of the most emotional Bob Dylan songs ever. And now the cherry on top is his hilarious nonchalance at all of it. All of that emotional build-up instantly crashed to the floor like Jenga. It got better. "Nick got a shout-out," Eileen said, wiping away her tears. "From who?" Pete said, looking around. "From who? We're at an Adele concert." "Who'd you think from?" "Bloody Adele," Eileen said, now hysterical in disbelief. Pete shrugged his shoulders and sipped his pint. Well, so what? He knows her. And that is reason 1001 why I love Pete Grimshaw.
Quality Sounds, music, radio, podcasts.
This is the final episode of Soft Lad by me, Nick Grimshaw. In Exiting a Dream, I talk about having a dream, making it come true, and then figuring out how it feels for the dream to run its course. Now what? Saying I was leaving Radio 1 in the summer of 2021 was great. It was like attending your own funeral, but better. I got to hear eulogies from those that I knew, and even better, from those I didn't. Also, I wasn't actually dead, so there was no downside, apart from the death of my childhood dream of getting to Radio 1. It's all I'd ever thought about, and now it was done. The radio dream had started way back in my preteen youth. I'd tried before to pinpoint what it was exactly that made me believe in radio so much. I guess it came from being desperately bored in Oldham, not being the centre of the universe. And we were a one-telly household, so a radio in my room gave me some freedom, a window into another world. Even before I fell in love with radio for the music, I had an emotional run-in with it. One weekday morning, I sat with my mum Eileen in a blue Ford Fiesta. We parked up, but neither of us were able to leave the car. We were sucked into a story, a love story. It was Simon Bates's Our Tune. I must have been no older than 8. Me and my mum sat on the edge of our seats, watching the radio, like in wartime, edging closer to catch every last feeling, both moved by the words. And that, right there, was it. It was more than the song, more than the story. It was the shared experience. I was addicted. As I got to secondary school, my bedtime saw me listening to John Peel on the worn wooden floor of my bedroom as I flipped through my enemies. I loved the intimacy of the show. It felt warm, messy, and human, like it was just me listening. I genuinely thought that I'd discovered John Peel, and proudly told a school friend of this old man that plays mad songs at night time. I was then told he was one of the most famous DJs ever. Right. By the time I was doing my GCSEs, I was a firm Radio 1 mega fan, hanging off every word of Sarah Cox. I could do this, I thought. Sarah was live and loose, a proper raver, sounding brilliantly batty and just the right amount of rowdy. It was Radio 1 where I was introduced to Breakbeat by Annie Nightingale. I learned all the names of the clubs in Ibiza and the subgenres of house music. It taught me all I wanted to know about life outside of Oldham, beamed right into my suburban bedroom. I wanted in. I had a very specific vision. I didn't just want to be on Radio 1. I wanted to host the Radio 1 breakfast show, and that was that. It was less a dream and more a calling. If anyone could chat shit with an encyclopedic knowledge of every pop video ever, go out all night and chat to strangers, it was me. I had to do it. I just didn't want to say it out loud. My dad Pete, on the other hand, was intent on me being a businessman of some sort, and my college careers questionnaire came back with the suggestion of funeral director. Grim Funerals, to be fair, does have a ring to it. But I'd never lost faith. I knew radio was going to happen for me, and it needed to. I had no backup plan. And it happened one evening in 2007 when I popped in to see Annie Mac on her new Sunday night show. I'd met Annie a couple of years before at Glastonbury. The meeting wasn't as professional as I'd have liked. It was raining and I was wearing some fake Versace wraparound sunglasses as a joke. I told Annie I wanted to be a Radio 1 DJ too, and can't really remember anything else because Glastonbury. A few years later, we meet again in the Hawley Arms in Camden. She told me about this new show she was going to do and how they wanted a co-host. It was to be called Switch and was to be made to soothe the end of the weekend feeling. I was asked to go in for 5 minutes and do a What I've Been Up To segment with Annie. I chatted about new bands I'd seen, and then, in a flash, it was all over. I remember crying as I travelled home because the dream had finally come true. I was asked to come back the next week, this time for a 20-minute slot, and before long, Annie and I were co-hosting the show together. We felt it was our mission to make the end of the weekend as fun and chaotic as possible, and we achieved this by doing absolutely no prep whatsoever. We do long, rambling links like two hungover pals in the pub. It was exactly what Radio 1 was to me. Wild, fun, lawless, and your parents would hate it. The other great thing about Switch was that Eileen and Pete got off my case, as they'd actually heard of Radio 1. But it was the 3 letters in front of Radio 1 that got my dad going. B, B, and C. Finally, a proper job, he said. Well, sort of. The Today Show it was not. While they thought I'd grown up overnight, I was in fact spending my nights hanging out my arse or encouraging guests to put their face in a bowl, in a game imaginatively called Face in a Bowl. Emily Maitlis was not shaken. But to me, this lawless nonsense was validation. I would leave work feeling happier than when I arrived. All I needed was the attention of an international A-list pop star and 1 million listeners. That's it. After a couple of years of pissing around on Sunday nights, Annie left me for prime time, Friday night's mega dance show, and I was asked to do weekend breakfast. Ouch. It meant 5 a.m. alarms, and for 24-year-old me, 5 a.m. was around the time I'd maybe start calling it a night. It may come as no surprise that I didn't even last a year on weekend breakfast and was moved to night times to host the slot that John Peel had held and that captivated my teenage ears. Daytime radio, of course, had bigger audiences, but evening shows felt intimidating in a different way. The DJs on air were musical experts, confidently writing off artists with a "nah, heard it before" in the very scary specialist office. This is where Zane Lowe, Annie Nightingale, Giles Peterson and Mary Ann Hobbs would all hang out. I was conscious they just thought I was an idiot from T4. Mainly because I was an idiot from T4. I loved this nighttime show though. I held an open door policy for guests. By the time the clock struck 12, there'd be a merry gang of artists, their label reps and some of my pals all gathered in the studio, and we'd all roll off for another night on the tiles. Then one morning, I woke up to a text from my agent, Caroline. She wanted me to meet Big Boss Ben tomorrow. This is serious, I thought. Caroline said it had to be at her office, not Radio 1, and was to be at 9 a.m, and I couldn't be late. Okay, I'm dead. The next day rolls around, and being a night owl, I'd never left the house in rush hour before. What's everyone doing so early, I thought. There was nowhere to park, so I had to ditch the car a street away and leg it to the office. I ran up the stairs, flustered and red, and gulped down a glass of water and flopped into the sofa with the words, "Sorry I'm late, I'm terrible in the morning." My agent Caroline put her head in her hands. "Ah, sorry to hear that. Because I want you to host the breakfast show," said Big Boss Ben. So it was done. I collected my parking ticket from the car windscreen and texted my nearest and dearest an egg emoji. My dream was to be realised. I was to take over in September 2012, but I had a big job on my hands. The breakfast show is seen as the shop window on Radio 1. I was taking over from Chris Moyles, and not only had he been on air for 8 solid years, but tonally, we couldn't have been more different. Yes, both northern and both love the sound of our own voices, but apart from that, the change did feel seismic. He was a DJ employed pre-social media, but the times were a-changing, and Radio 1 needed to change too. Employing the 27-year-old from Night Times was a statement of intent. Radio was being reinvented for the digital generation, and I was at the heart of it. And initially, the reaction wasn't that nice to experience. When the first set of listening figures came in, I felt like I'd let everyone down. I was on this rickety roller coaster ride, riding out my emotions of agony and ecstasy. The ecstasy of getting to do my dream job every day. The agony of a builder saying, "You shit, mate," as I got out my car at 6 a.m. But the bosses said they were happy. That was the plan, they said. And it worked. Radio 1 became this beast of content, no longer just a wireless analog streamed into our Fiestas. We'd found our groove. It was a constant feeling of go, 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 and I loved it. On Fridays, big guests would come in with their world premieres of new music. I worked best under pressure, and when all eyes and ears were on our show, I came alive. And I could write a book, probably, on guests alone. Kim Kardashian, Denzel Washington, Dolly Parton, David Attenborough, you name them, they came on. The greatest gift I got from breakfast was chats with strangers on the other end of the radio that had drawn me in as a kid. I thought I'd have 2 years or maybe 3 if I was lucky. In the end, it was a month short of 6 years of 5 a.m. alarm clocks. Enough was enough. Over the course of the nearly 6 years, I had started to enjoy the routine of being up and at 'em with the bin men and birdsong. But what now? I was offered a show with the worst phrase in radio, drive time. Always makes me think of dads. But terrible name aside, it's a great gig. No alarm clock, and I got to hand over to Annie Mac every evening. From the minute I started, I knew it'd be the last thing I did for Radio 1. It felt full circle. Then the pandemic hit, and it felt like everything stopped. Apart from radio. All the staff were removed from the building so we could broadcast alone in hellish safety. And in a time away from family, friends, and social interactions, radio really stopped me from going mad. As I rode my bike through the deserted streets of London each day, I felt how lucky I was. Those rides into my childhood dream became emotional, life-affirming pilgrimages of gratitude. I felt vulnerable on air, with 4 hours to fill on very little lols. There was no fun news or sport. I'd done nothing fun, nor had the listeners or celebrities. We just had to exist. But it freed me up to talk honestly about how I miss my family. I felt closer to the listeners than ever before and found beauty in simple conversation. It was a welcome come down from the high-octane ride of my past 14 years of broadcasting. Then, it was time to leave. Like with all my teenage obsessions of David Beckham and backwards Kangol hats, I too had started to fall out of love with Radio 1. I felt I'd done it. Once I made the decision to go, I told my mum. She was shocked. "Well, what are you going to do every day?" she asked. I tried RJing for another perspective. "It'll be invigorating," she said. And it was exactly that, like a shower during a bad hangover. But what happens when the dream ends? What now? I'd never thought about this bit. Maybe I'll write a book. Soft Lad was written and read by me, Nick Grimshaw, and abridged by Julian Wilkinson. The producer is Justine Willett, and this is a BBC Books production for BBC Sounds.